Welcome to Back on the Broomstick,
A modern witch's spoken word grimoire.
where two witchy friends from way back are reconnecting to their pagan roots after a long period of mundanity.
We're rewalking the path of the wise and trying out all the latest spells, rituals, and magical theory in today's witchcraft and pagan practices.
So grab your wand and your incense
Your cauldron and your crystals
and join us
as we get
back on the broomstick.
Hi, and welcome to Back on the Broomstick. I'm Layla, and on this episode, we're talking about the Wheel of the Year holiday of Beltane. Beltane is coming up on May 1st, and it is a holiday of new beginnings. The world is in motion, green things are rising, and so too is our energy for all things new and creative.
And I'm Shell, and I said this before and I'll say it again. Boy, do I love this time of year, and I love Beltane. It gives me that first outdoorsness of the year. We said this previously, but like this is like the first camping weekend of the year and the first communing with nature weekend of the year, so to say. You're out, you're sleeping in it, you're living in it for at least 24 hours. And boy, I just love it. But we want to kick off today on what is Beltane today? Like, what the hell is Beltane today? We read in books, we talk about what Beltane was, I don't know, 100, 150, 200 years ago. But Layla, let's talk about what Beltane is today.
Here in the Northeast USA, the season really doesn't kick off until Beltane. I mean, it literally just snowed the other day here.
Spring is a fickle, angry woman.
I tried covering my plants and the dirt froze solid. So it isn't until after Beltane here in the Northeast USA where things really start to warm up. And it's now when we see the land bursting with life. And that's really what this season is all about, is celebrating that new life, the growth that we see all around us. This time of spring, this early summertime, life is growing, whether we're ready for it or not. It's going to come out, it's going to burst, it's going to break free and grow. It kind of doesn't care where you're at or if you're ready for that.
I assure you, we're ready.
Absolutely.
We're totally ready.
And we've talked a lot about traditionally in witchcraft, in Wicca, the Wheel of the Year holiday of Beltane has been about sex and sexuality. It's been about fertility and growth. It's been about creating new life, because that's a lot of what we see in nature around us. But because we're more complex people than that, we have realized that the season and the holiday is about so much more. So one of the big things that you see all around you is flowers and growth and the land. And that's really where the emphasis should be, is on this erupting beauty, this erupting abundance, this growth, and the land awakening all around us.
We've spent a lot of time recently talking about groups and communities and covens, but let's talk about Beltane as a solitaire. How can you celebrate these types of spokes in the wheel when you're by yourself, when it's just you, yourself, and you? And, especially this is supposed to be like a fertility type holiday. What road are we headed down when this is a solitary venture? Because not everybody is blessed with a coven or a community or having people nearby them. So let's talk about, what are we doing here if we're just us, ourselves, and us?
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because in the community here in Crystal City Circle, we're talking about Beltane and we're talking about celebrating the spoke of the wheel. And most of the people in this community, there are a handful that have celebrated with other people, but most people have either never celebrated a Beltane or have only ever celebrated it solitary. So this will be the first year that they celebrate with other people. And a lot of what I'm hearing from them is they did a lot of what we did before we found pagans. I don't know if you ever knew a time without pagans. Did you?
It's getting to the point where I'm starting to not remember a time without it.
That's true. So they did a lot of what I did before I found pagans is, you read something in a book and you go outside and you get under the moon and you celebrate the idea of duality within yourself.
And we've talked about this in the past, in past episodes, that in the 6 years that I spent in Salem, I was not always a part of a coven, and I struggled for the first few years to connect with a group there. And so I did spend the first several years in Salem, kind of doing things on my own. I didn't have you there. I hadn't connected with a group there. And it was just me, myself, and me. The one advantage I found there was being right on the ocean. I could go down and kind of commune with nature in the ocean, which I had never had that opportunity before in my life, having come from the country. So I would get my thrills out of kind of going and celebrating and honoring and communing with down in the beaches and areas of Salem that were near the water. You kind of find your way, I think, when you're just you. You leave offerings, you say little mantras, little prayers, little spells here and there. But I understand that feeling of, because it's just you, it feels like, am I really doing anything?
And you are. We're
You
both here.
are, but you get that feeling.
Shell and I are here to reassure you that you are. And one of the things I actually liked about being solitaire is that I had the ability to do whatever I wanted. I didn't have to wait for a group of people or coordinate times or anything like that. I could
No
just
meetings.
no meetings, no decisions. Anything that I wanted, I could have. So there were years where I did something very simple. I would lean into the sensuality of the season because that's another thing that this is about. Summer starting. The days are warmer. It's easier. It's a little less difficult. You've done the planting, you've done the spring cleaning. It's now starting to get into that slow, sensual summertime. And so I would lean into that and I would take a long bath or hot shower and I'd use all the best soaps and oils and perfumes. I would take my time afterwards and head to toe with every single lotion I have. I'd use a foot lotion and a knee lotion and an elbow lotion and a nose lotion. You use every single kind of lotion. Pamper myself. I'd put on my favorite oils, favorite perfume, favorite clothes that make me feel silky and smooth and sensual and happy. And I would go outside and just wander around in the sun and feel super witchy. This is the time to take witch maxing to the next level and do your
Right?
summer witchy self and love yourself and love all of that. Eat the foods that you like. The whole day would be about eating seasonal foods that were delicious, that I loved, and making things for myself. And other years, I would lean heavy into being super freaking witchy. I would cast circle formally. I would have a poem written for every single quarter. I would have a dramatic reading for the deity. And I would,
Of course you would.
well, yeah, because it's fun sometimes to like take it to the 11th level, right? Turn it right all the way
Right?
up. When you're by yourself, you can do that. And you can still lean into the idea of the sensuality, of abundance, of creation in yourself and enjoy that in yourself. I know Hecate is your deity, and I don't really ever think of her as like a Beltane type deity.
Not really.
Were there any particular deities that you associate with Beltane other than Hecate, or would you kind of work with her in that theme?
When we did our workshops at Sacred Space last year, we did a piece on Ellen of the Ways in Cernunnos. And I remember on the car ride home from Maryland, we had this deep discussion because I actually found the notes for it the other day. Um, we had this deep discussion about how Ellen, in many ways, kind of mirrored Hecate, and they
Weirdly.
had tons of similarities.
hmm
And at Beltane, honestly, I always really thought of Cernunnos or the Green Man,
Hey, the horny gods fit. What are you going to do?
but because I had Hecate so ingrained in me, I never really, it always had to be, even though it never felt like that was really her forte. So I never really thought of any other goddess necessarily during Beltane, but definitely Cernunnos, in that Green Man. But now that I have done some deeper reading, deeper investigating, getting more knowledge in the old noggin here, Ellen feels very right and as a similarity to Hecate.
Now, for those of you that don't know, Ellen of the Ways is a Welsh goddess, but she's one of those deities that is kind of a recreation, which isn't exactly the right way to say it. Basically, she is mentioned briefly or alluded to in a lot of old tales, and the idea of her is around, but wasn't really put together until recently.
Right. There was mentions of the concept of Ellen in the Mabinogi, but again, nothing that really defined her as a separate being per se.
Exactly. And I don't mind that. I don't mind that at all. I don't mind taking these in a scholarly way, these thoughts, these fragments, and looking at the culture and the society of the time, and then looking at what we need right now and deciding that Ellen of the Ways, this concept of a female pathwalker, a woman, a goddess who walks the liminal spaces of the woods, who works with the wild things, who works with the land and with nature, fits. It fits. It makes sense. It makes balance. And so I like that. And I don't mind when that is done in a scholarly way. I think it's beautiful, actually. And so she's a goddess that very much appeals to Shell and I in a lot of different ways. And her being the pathwalker and Hecate being the guardian of the crossroads, there's a lot of intersectionality there. And we had a really fun discussion about it. So that's for a different podcast, different podcast.
But I feel like that Hecate approves me working with Ellen, is what I'm saying.
So for Beltane, being able to work with any deity that has love, lust, sensuality, we mentioned the horny gods, and yes, that is part of it too. A very healthy idea about sex and sexuality and procreation is part of this, but just one small part. It's more about growth and finding that duality within yourself, being able to hold these ideas of the season, setting your energetic roots and reaching for the sky, trying to do that growth, forward motion. A lot of creativity. I find that Beltane is so much about creativity. So leaning into that, finding deities that work with that. Now, one of Shell's favorite things and one of my favorite things with Beltane is it also has to do with flowers and growth of that nature. And so one of the things we wanted to talk about was how to incorporate a little bit of flower magic into your Beltane celebration.
Now, Layla and I had a little fun with this because, as y'all know, we really like to kind of dive into things. And there were some things about flowers that I didn't realize. Normally, when I think of using flowers in magic, I think of using the dried pieces for incense or teas and things of that nature. And I guess I really didn't deep dive flower magic until recently. So it was pretty eye-opening.
I, as you know, am a huge reader. I love reading everything I can get my little hands on, to the point where my mother used to ground me from reading when I was a kid. True
That'd
story.
be like grounding you from journaling.
Right? No, please don't. It was terrible. It was terrible. But one of the things I learned in my many books that I would read is about the Victorian flower language. They had this whole idea of codes that they could send in flowers. When I discovered witchcraft and started working with magic, it was very natural to me to incorporate flowers and their meanings, fresh flowers too, into spells, my altars, spell workings, holiday celebrations, that kind of thing. So it seemed very, very natural because they already had these meanings that I knew about, including ways to send messages.
This is all kind of was a little eye-opening to me. Maybe not eye-opening, but I was looking at it from the wrong angle. I was looking at flowers, like I said, from that incense and tea point of view. But flowers carry meaning through scent, color, and energy. And the Victorians just kind of organized that into a code. You know, if you think about it, same as herbs, same as crystals, why wouldn't they just do the same thing with flowers?
Yeah, it's exactly like what we do with, like you said, crystals and herbs and things like that. And they pull from a lot of the same things for the meaning of flowers that we do for the magical meaning. The folklore, mythology, herbalism, earlier tales. And sometimes that led to meanings being a little bit different, but they would even journal them and keep books on what they felt that these flowers meant.
But you can say the same thing about, we've said this about any other thing. Maybe when you're working with incense, for example, maybe basil just turns you right the hell off, and you're not going to use basil for XYZ. Whereas I love basil more than anything. And for XYZ, it works perfect for me. So,
Exactly.
flowers would be the same exact thing. So, as much as it pains me to say it, we're not going to call it journaling. We're going to call it making a written book of shadows on
Okay.
your personal associations.
Flowers for springtime, for late spring, early summer, they're everywhere. They're coming up everywhere. Lilacs are about to bloom, and I flipping love lilacs. Now, the Victorians did not use flowers for magic, but the meanings that they assigned to them can be used in magical
Oh,
spells.
they were really using them for magic. They just didn't want to admit it.
Probably. I guess some of the magic that they were using them for was to send messages, hidden secret notes, by sending a bouquet of flowers to either a friend, a lover, or an enemy. So you would pick the flowers based on the meaning, and hopefully the person you were sending them to assigned the same meanings to the same flowers.
Did you have to send like a code sheet?
You probably should have, right? Because everything meant something. The flowers, like roses. When you think of roses, Shell, everybody thinks the same thing first, particularly red roses.
You're proving your point here because when I think of roses, it's gonna depend. Red roses think of love, whereas yellow roses are kind of like, you're all right. But I don't like yellow. It's not my favorite color. So if I got yellow roses, I would be a little more put off,
Right.
especially if the person who sent them knew my dislike of the color yellow.
Exactly. Yellow roses typically mean friendship. A lot of people here, even in the United States, we know that like red roses are love, yellow roses are friendship. Pink can be like a simpler love or a lighter love. And white is purity, right? So
Right.
we know what these kind of mean. These meanings have filtered down. They're kind of logical. But I know Shell well enough that even though yellow roses mean friendship, if I
Send
sent
me damn
her,
orange ones.
right? If I sent her a yellow bouquet of roses, she'd be like, "What's wrong? Did I piss you off? What's going on here?" So so that would mean entirely something different to her. So you kind of got to know that. That's where your journaling comes in. So in your spell work, you can take the meanings of these flowers, but you can also go one step further and borrow something from the Victorians. They also had the direction that the flowers were facing could mean something. The ribbon that they were tied with could mean something, even to the point where if they were tied tightly or if they were tied loosely.
Kind of like a tarot card. You need to pay attention to all the fine details. And as Layla says, then journal it.
That's right. What do those details mean to you? I guess this kind of gets into the thing that everybody hated in English class, in literature class growing up, right? Is your teacher says, "Now, what does this poem mean to you? What does it mean when the author said the curtains were closed against the window?" And some people are literal and they'll say, "Well, that means that it was too bright out and they wanted to close the curtains." Or you could go a little deeper and say they were closing the curtains because they didn't want anyone to see them. They didn't want anyone to see inside at who they really were, right? So put on your English literature cap and really get deep with these meanings. If someone tied the flowers really tightly, that might mean that they want to hold you close. Or maybe it means that they want you to keep your mouth shut and keep secrets close to the vest, right? So you kind of have to interpret these things using your literary brain.
I started looking at lists of different flowers and what their associations were. And there was some things that came up that I was a little surprised at. In a lot of these flower dictionaries, you're going to find things like basil and dill. And I guess it took me a minute because, I'm not really a good planter person and I generally kill things, even though I've been really doing good lately. When I think about dill, it does have a flower on it at some point. And when you think about basil, basil does end up flowering. So sometimes even herbs that you don't realize flower actually flower.
And some of those herbs smell really good. They can add a lot of depth to a bouquet if you're putting an herb in with it. So it's funny that you mentioned herb and dill because I was trying to figure out, it's pretty easy. If you're going to put an I love you bouquet together, like what would you put in a small I love you bouquet? If you wanted to say that message to someone, even without knowing the language of flowers.
If I was just sending a random I love you bouquet, it would be red roses with baby's breath. Another thing people forget about is baby's breath, which is everlasting love, purity, new beginnings. And you see that in the grocery store, in the florist shops, everywhere that they sell flowers, you will see just red roses and baby's breath. And I think that's kind of the ultimate I love you.
Yeah, that's the standard cliche I love you. Now, if my husband was going to give me an I love you bouquet, if he gave me red roses and baby's breath, he'd he better look out because that's like, you can just go snatch that off of a stand. That doesn't put any thought. So for me, that would just be like a generic, I love you. And I
You're
would
making
want,
that man cut somebody's lilacs from their front yard, aren't you?
hell yes. Lilacs, sunflowers, something different, bright, beautiful, something that smells good. I love red roses. Don't get me wrong. I think they're fantastic. Red roses
But
and
you
baby's
also feel
breath.
they're cliche.
I do a little bit. Yeah, yeah. But I do love them. Now, if he wanted to get me roses, most of the time he'll get me something that's a different color. Like you said, orange. I do love a good orange rose or like those silver roses. But yeah. So again, it comes down to knowing the person, right? It's not just the flower. So if you're working with a deity or if you're working with a land spirit, if you're working with an ancestor and you know what flowers they like or don't like, that's where you should go, regardless of what the book meaning says.
And that's why I like sometimes before ritual, I will go get a seasonal bouquet, generally from the grocery store. Not gonna lie, they really do have awesome flowers at the grocery store. So I will get like one of those seasonal bouquets, and I think they kind of embody what I'm looking for as part of my altar piece more so than roses. So it's definitely, again, personal preferences. But again, I try to pick things that are I have cats. A lot of my friends have cats. So I'm generally not going to pick a lily for the sole fact of it will hurt my kitties or my friends' kitties. So, I also take things into consideration, not just meaning, but what is where I'm taking these flowers for ritual, or is someone there allergic to any of those
Yeah.
particular things? So, different considerations, but ultimately a good seasonal bouquet on your altar, boom, can't beat it.
Now, here's a good seasonal bouquet for you, and this is also a little spell. This spell is like if you want to give this to a coworker who's annoying you and you need them to leave you alone, or Mother's Day is coming up. Maybe your mother-in-law is a little overbearing and you need her to back off.
Wait, let me get my notebook out. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right, good. So you could make them a bouquet with the basis of marigold and yellow carnations. Now, marigolds can represent grief and sometimes jealousy. Yellow carnations can represent disappointment or rejection. So if you put those together, it's kind of like, I am sad that you are a jerk and I reject you. Then you could also put in something like mint or basil because, it's new for the season. They might not be surprised that there's a little bit of fresh herbs in there to give it a little springtime flavor. Now, mint can also be associated with cooling things down or keeping them restrained because, as we know, mint is one of those things that likes to run wild. So the symbolism of having picked it and put it in a bouquet is kind of like containing it. So you're trying to tell this person you want to contain their words or their rambunctiousness, cool down their emotions. And then the basil is surprisingly tied to dislike. So putting that, even though I love basil, if you put that into a bouquet, they might like it because it has a nice scent and it adds that little springtime to it, but it's an herb that represents pushing someone away. So this cute little spring bouquet that you have given to the person is a spell that really says, keep your shit to yourself and back off.
I like the smell of marigolds. I've grown up with, my mother and my grandmother would plant them every year, but they're very off-putting to me for some reason. And I love that spell. I love that.
Alternatively, you could bring in a spell to draw someone to you. Maybe you want to put together violets for affection, forget-me-nots for connection and remembrance, lavender for devotion, and then maybe throw in a red rose or two to bring in that romantic love and give that to someone that you want to start something with, because that's a very subtle spell that tells them, hey, I'm interested.
So, Layla, I also came up with a little spell as well. I love the overflowing streams this time of year. We talk about all of the growth and all of the newness, but there's nothing more beautiful than a bursting stream this time of year. So I do like to kind of incorporate that on occasion with magic this time of year. So I do have a flower spell for love that involves you're going to need to be by a body of water, whether it be a creek, a stream, a river, the ocean, whatever. So I have put together rose, again, classic symbol of love, and Venus and Aphrodite, passion, commitment, and affection. I have basil in this for attracting devotion. I have dill in here for fostering lust in romantic relationships, ensuring faithfulness and strengthening your romantic bonds. Baby's breath for everlasting love, purity, and new beginnings. And jasmine for sensuality, spiritual connection, and invoking feelings of love and harmony.
That sounds fantastic.
What I do is I take these things, I put them together almost as if I was making an incense, but I do not crush any of this. No mortar and pestle in this one. I just take them and kind of loosely put them in a bowl. And then I combine them, mix them, like I said, as I would with loose incense. I take this mixture, go down to a stream, which again, you can do this at a river, the ocean, whatever. Put the flowers in the water, let them float away, and speak to the nature spirits and say something along the lines of, may the love that is meant to be come back to me and find me as these are floating away.
I love that.
And I don't know, there's just something beautiful about flowers and petals floating in the water, in my personal opinion, floating it away to the gods, almost like you're making a wish to be sent out to the water gods.
The fact that it's in water, and water is so much about emotion and the
Yep.
deeper emotions, I think that's beautiful. I think it's perfect. And especially this time of year, honoring those waterways, continuing the honoring that we did earlier in the season with Bridget's Wells, and honoring the life-giving force of water for this season is very important. So I think that touches on a bunch of different things for Beltane. I think that's beautiful.
And you know, everybody wants to do some kind of love spell this time of year. So there's one that is not toxic.
There you go. And using the flowers, using flower scents, that can be love, self-love, that can be love of your space, that can be love of your land, love of your family. Put these bouquets in different rooms. Create a little spell with scent. Create a little spell with flowers of the season. They're bursting out everywhere. And you don't have to cut them. You don't have to cut them down. You can honor the flowers in your garden, or you can plant a couple seeds in a cup and have a little flower grow up. I've mentioned before my husband's love of hyacinths, so we made sure he had some hyacinth bulbs on his desk so that when they popped up, you get that nice fresh smell of the hyacinths. And that brings a lot of joy and peace into your life. So you can set whatever spell you want by putting bouquets in different rooms. And that is a way that you can continue the magic of Beltane throughout the season and not just on May 1st.
You can even put a garden gnome out there to guard your flowers.
Garden
Dun,
gnomes
dun,
creep me out,
dun.
man. They really do. I don't know. They're a little creepy.
Because they're guarding something. That's why they're doing their job.
They're like, Layla, don't pick the flowers out of this garden. Stay back. Yeah, they probably do need to keep me out. In the spirit of enjoying these flowers and bringing them into your home to honor Beltane and to honor this season of early summer, we've kind of come up with another 9 sacred things.
You know, you guys really loved the 9 sacred woods of the Northeast. And we were, I don't know, Layla, is taken aback the right word? We were taken aback by the amount of you that responded on the Facebook group with your list of your 9 sacred woods. And all of the lists were beautiful. We were just so thrilled that you were able to find a connection with that we thought, hey, since we're bumping to flowers, let's come up with 9 sacred flowers of the Northeast. And again, you are going to have sacred flowers to your area and your region. And we encourage you to take notice of what flowers are sacred in your area. But we're going to talk about for a minute what flowers are sacred in our area and what our 9 sacred flowers of the Northeast USA are.
The first couple that we have are blue cornflower, and this is something that you will see all over in the Northeast USA in the summertime. And blue cornflower is a psychic flower. This is all about seeing the future, seeing with clarity. This is something that can open your vision. And dandelion is another one because, of course, dandelion's everywhere and we love it. There's
Dandelion does not get the credit it deserves. Let's
Seriously.
just start right there.
It is a nutritional and a magical powerhouse. Absolutely love dandelion. And it's one of those things that can be for persistence. It can be for wishes. It can be for joy and summer and sun. There's just so many magical associations with it. And the third one is mullein, which is another powerhouse.
Your absolute favorite.
It is. It is another medicinal and magical powerhouse. The little yellow flowers have uses in tinctures. The leaves have uses as smokables, incense, teas. It's just fantastic.
And do not forget about making Hecate torches.
We never would, especially not shell. Those Hecate, I have a couple ready for us to make one of these days. But yeah, they have so many uses. It is a torch. It is for holding boundaries. It's for staying connected. It's for warding and it's for crossing liminal spaces. Love me some mullein.
Bee balm, so pretty. That is one of those things where you just want to run around the yard and pick it. I find bee balm to be something that it brings me a sense of soothing. So when I'm thinking of needing something soothing in a spell, I go to bee balm.
Yeah, it's like that soothing confidence. It's like that gentle strength. I love it.
Almost like that steady queen bee, that steadiness, the queen bee is under you, keeping things steady and smooth.
That's a great description. I like that.
Rose, again, we talked about Rose already, that love, that passion. This is when I think of Rose, I'm thinking more romantic love. But there is a sense of, on occasion, I will use Rose for protection. I will use Rose for insight, sometimes for clarity.
The thorns on that rose are fantastic for protection.
Since you mentioned that, there has been times I've used roses in spells where I've actually cut the head off and
Off
really
with their heads.
kinda and used that thorny stalk in my spell.
Ah.
So every rose has its thorn, poison said it best back in the 80s, just saying. Bleeding hearts. When I was a child, these were my favorite flowers. I don't know why. I just thought they were hearts. I didn't even know they were called bleeding hearts until later on in life.
It's my youngest child's favorite too.
When I see the bleeding hearts, a couple of things that I associate with them. Sometimes it can be grief, sometimes it can be remorse. But because there are pink ones and red ones, I've always sometimes looked at the pink ones as like that grief and remorse ones, and then the red ones as more of that love and lust.
And the white ones as healing from heartbreak.
Yeah, actually, I've never seen white ones. So again, personal associations. Lilacs, the next one on the list.
That's my favorite. I do love a good lilac.
Talk to me about lilacs, Layla,
Oh,
because I can't get enough of these things ever.
lilacs, if you look at them from with a magical eye, with a magical idea, they're sweet, they're strong. The scent is heady and it's everywhere when you see it, but they grow wild. They can be tamed and kept small, but they tend to flourish best when they're wild and unruly, but beautiful and smell good. So these are all qualities of lilacs, but they have that idea of nostalgia of the past. They don't seem like a flashy modern flower, right? They're a little more understated.
I get patience out of lilac, and I think it's because when you plant a lilac, you have to be patient and wait years for it to flower. So I always think of patience when I think of lilacs.
Yes, and then the growing season for those lilacs is they bloom and they're strong and heady, and then they're gone. The season is fleeting. It takes forever to get there. And then the moment that they're there is so fleeting until the next year. So all of those qualities go into lilac. The next one we have is Black-Eyed Susan.
Love, love, love.
Bold, confident, personal power, optimism, standing tall in your own energy. I love those.
I get confidence out of Black-Eyed Susan's, a sense of knowing who you are, knowing oneself. They're loud and proud. Black-Eyed Susans are loud and proud.
And then Aster is the last one. See these everywhere, especially in my yard. Purples and blues, these are fantastic. And I see these as wisdom. These are ancestor connection, intuitive work, connections to the unseen, the other side.
I love this list. I really love this list. And I have gone through your yard and I've picked these little asters, and every flower that we have put on this list is something that I think it comes with a sense of nostalgia. It comes with a sense of wisdom, and there's magic in all of these. And there could have been 10 other ones that we could have picked and put on this list. There's an abundance of options of flowers and magic everywhere. And I was so short-sighted all these years thinking of it from the view of incense and teas only. A lot of flowers are very good in teas, and I don't know why I didn't take it that next step, but that's kind of part of the magic is over time learning new tricks and tips and different ways to utilize things and take advantage of some of the components you're already using for other things and using them for something you haven't thought of.
From Beltane until Litha, this season between the spokes is all about blooming. It's all about growing and coming into your own and creating something new from that growth. And flowers are a perfect representation of that. So, whether you're making a Beltane crown for yourself or for someone else, or if you're decorating your home with bouquets or single flowers or planting flowers in your garden, pay attention to the magical meanings. Pay attention to your own personal magical meanings and make a message for the spring and for yourself and for the season between the spokes using those flowers or working with those flowers.
Layla, you make me want to go down and get a bundle of flowers now.
Well, there's a bunch blooming out in the back field, so why don't we go take a walk in the sunshine until it freezes again this spring? And hopefully, you guys all have our new mailbox and are sending us either a postcard or a letter to try and be the first to win the race to be the first letter in our P.O. box.
The race is on, folks.
The information is in the show notes and on our website. You can check it out there. Send us something, just a simple postcard or a letter with what you would like a personal spell handwritten from Shell and I to be, and we will check that mailbox ASAP. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, give us some reviews, give us some stars. It really helps the show out and it helps people to find us. We hope you're enjoying your spring weather and we hope you have a fabulous Beltane.
So guess what, guys? We want you to stay wise, stay wicked,
And keep it witchy.